Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to see so many people coming and joining us already. Welcome to the EWORA event. Just seeing the numbers going up. Brilliant. Marvelous. We're absolutely thrilled to see that our president of EWORA is already here and on board. Welcome to Gulsun and other board members. It's lovely to see you here this afternoon. And I shall just wait a little bit. We have about 70 people signed up for this afternoon, and I'm just going to quietly try and amuse you for a few minutes as we collect more attendees. And then we will begin with our program this evening. So I'm really thrilled to be able to work together with EWORA. EWORA is the European Women's Rectors Association that is presided over by Gulsun Saglamar from Turkey, former rector of ITU. And I'm a board member of that now, and we'll also have the pleasure of hosting later on this summer an EWORA conference in June. In the meantime, EWORA has decided that it would be important to share some ideas and create an opportunity to talk with each other about various themes in further education that concern women rectors and leaders, women leaders of universities, primarily in Europe, but not only. And this afternoon we have nominally 70 participants if they all come. And this is going to be really very exciting. So I'd also like in advance to thank Gert Kortemeyer, who is the head of our teaching development and technology unit at ETH, who's helped me to put together this evening seminar. Well, it's evening for me, it's morning in the States. And I just wanted to just remind you what we're going to do. So I'm just going to make a short welcome that won't take very long. And then we're going to go on to a round of 3 separate talks with 3 speakers. And I will introduce each of them in turn. And after that, we'll have about 5 minutes Q&A. They will talk for 15, maximum 20 minutes. Then they will have Q&A. And I would like you, please, to put your questions into go to the participants list, put your questions there by raising a hand, or rather raise the hand, and then I will take the people top down who have raised a hand. And if somebody's already asked a question earlier on, I might well jump over you and go to the next one. So just as a warning, so please go into the participants and raise the blue hand, and then I know the order of the people who have wanted to speak. So that's important. And then we will have, if there's chance at the end, we'll have a more open, exactly, you can see that Kristin has just shown us how to do that. If you go to the participant, Kristin, could you put it back on again, please? And you could do that, and then you can, please remember after you've answered, thank you, Kristin, one of our board members of EWORA as well, then you can take it down again. That's really fantastic. So that's the plan, and if we have time at the end, we'll have a panel, and then I will make some closing remarks. So just, I think, to get started, we've got now 31 attendees and the 5 panelists already here. So just to start, I'm Sarah Springman. I'm the rector of ETH Zurich. I've been here doing this job since January 2015, and I'm a board member of EWORA, and I'm really thrilled to be here in the second of the EWORA webinars that have taken place over this winter, over this Corona time, I should say. And today we are looking at basically rethinking higher education with a focus on blended learning. And we blinked and the world changed earlier this year. For us, it was in March. We had 83 hours to be online by 8 o'clock on Monday morning, and it happened. And it was surprisingly successful in many different ways, but it was hugely challenging in others. And after 600 years or so of teaching in the normal way, with your professor, the sage on the stage, at that stage, mainly men, of course, standing up there with students, some paying attention, some being working very hard, writing a lot, some sleeping quietly and others not concentrating very well. Still happens today, we all know that. 50 years ago, Open University and universities like Fern, Universität, Hagen began with a more remote way of teaching. The media has changed, and in the last 20 years, it has become increasingly digital. I was lucky enough to be doing that. I put my first online course 20 years ago with a very extensive system that probably would have been very good in this Corona times. But it's changed since then. And now I think we have the responsibility to take the best of the remote teaching and learning and the presence teaching and learning to bring together a better learning experience for our students in the future. And that's why we're here this afternoon, because we're not going to waste a good crisis. And so in that sense, we want to ask our experts how we should do it. And therefore, it's absolutely logical that we should be asking the rector of the Fern Universität Hagen, the remote learning university in Hagen, Pellert, who has been in post since March of 2016, to help to tell us how to do it. She's had a very dynamic career. She's been in various roles in the University of Economics and Business Administration in Vienna, the beginning of her career. She became an extraordinary professor in Klagenfurt and then moved on to being Vice Chancellor of Teaching, Staff Development and Women's Advancement at the University of Graz in Austria. She went on to the University of Krems, became a professor also at the German University of Continuing Education. She's the founding president of the Berlin University for Professional Studies and was also president of the Carl Benz Academy in Beijing in China. So again, international experience. And most recently, she's become a spokeswoman of the Digital Universities of North Rhine-Westphalia, and she's a member of the Digital Council of the Federal Government of Germany. So on that note, I hand the word over to Rector Pellert. Thank you very much, Rector Pellert.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm going to share my screen now. So hope you can all see that. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And maybe this, I think, as you said, it's exactly about blended learning we are thinking of. I mean, it's not about one against the other, but really to have blended learning. I think this brings the quality increase, and that's what we should talk about. As Sarah said, let's make the best out of this crisis. And I think digital learning is really a structural challenge. So we have to think, what are we positioned adequately to enable learning, and not only enabling learning because of Corona, but because of the 21st century. What is needed? What do we need? I mean, you mentioned, yeah, I think these pictures, this is from the 18th century. This is from the 1940s. The pictures have not changed such a lot. And I'm afraid if you look in some classrooms, maybe not in the last semester, but in the so-called golden times of present, you find a lot of these pictures where one is telling the others. And so for me, to start with is, what is good learning about? So I think we have to leave out digital for a moment, but first to get a common, a joint understanding, what is good learning about? Because I think digitization is changing that. It changes how we learn, what we learn, where we learn, with whom we learn, and we should take advantage of these new possibilities in schools, in universities, in continuing education. So it opens up completely new possibilities. For instance, how we learn. I think the major challenge, or what I love about digitization, is we can really organize learning independently of time and place. We have about 80,000 students, 80% of them have jobs. So they are seeking a study model where they are free and flexible to organize education into their busy lives. So we have multimedia communication, open contact. We have kind of MOOCs, you all tried that, social reading. Now we are all in these new formats of examination, prototypes, badges, e-portfolios. And of course, as Sarah said, with us, we have always been a kind of media-based university. We always had to think, okay, the students are not there, how do I reach them? How we tried to reach them changed. It's booklets, it's, I don't know, video cassettes, it's TV in former times, but nowadays you have this social media. So you have a lot more of opportunities for really collaboration and networking. That has changed. You have a lot of personalization possibilities that leads to changed roles. So what we learn. And I think I'm in the field of lifelong learning. And I always discovered if we don't have a picture of humankind to being masochistic in a way, then we have to think, how can we raise their motivation? How can we click and link to their interests? So how can we look here? You have in YouTube these possibilities to mix this. But first of all, we have to think, what is my interest? Learning is some process in the person, it's intrapersonal. We can only shape the environment. So if we can click or link to the interests of the students via these new ways, let's take social media, games, open workshops, virtual classrooms, conversion of public spaces. I think the interesting thing is that we can combine these ways. Here you see typical classroom at the Fern Universität, where you have this video, you have the chat, you can show something. You are all now familiar with that, but I think the most important thing is that the interests of the students have to be touched. And otherwise, we have now interesting possibilities for individual pathways. So align the learning process with the interest of the learners. That's what I think digitization could help. So it changes also with whom we learn. Yeah, it's not only in the institution, it's everywhere. So learning can happen at home, at the job, in the underground, in the plane, wherever. So somehow we have to organize that the teaching and learning comes to the learners and not the other way around. The learner comes into the institution. And I think this is for me the biggest advantage, that we really have to think about the learner. Where is he or she? What is his or her interests? And these new media possibilities are only then good if we start with that question. So it changes also when we learn. So we have, of course, you have synchronous, where we all meet like now, yeah, at the same time, we're at least in a virtual place, but this can also be asynchronous. It can media supported. You have all these different media, but all should be guided by the basic line, where is the learner and how do I get into his world and his or her interests. And here I have a quote from an article I wrote with some friends, that I have the impression that digitalization so far has not led, maybe this was written before Corona, but up to now, it has led to few disruptive innovations or major strategic changes. It has been not very much thought from the perspective of the actual user. And that's my main concern. How can we shift this? We all signed Bologna Declaration, where there was written from teaching to learning. But if we look critically at our institutions. Are we doing that? Do we put the learner in the center? No, I don't think so. And now we have these new experiences, but we know the more we have dived into that, this is not just a technical issue. This has something about the attitude. We think about learning, and digitization as a social process can help us to transform these rigid structures but it creates a new way of teaching and learning. It's more transparent, it's more individualized on the one hand and collaborate on the other. But of course, and I think that's the hard thing, maybe we can touch that in the Q&A session, changing roles of teachers and institutions. So the longer you are in that, the more you come to very old-fashioned questions that have nothing to do with techniques or technology. It's about what is good learning. Here, just an outlook. We all know that future skills. Yeah, you all know those studies. We know that we need a lot of tech specialists. We know that we need key digital qualification. But I want to draw your attention that there are also key non-digital qualification that are very classical university attitudes and competencies, problem solving, critical thinking, and this is now needed more than ever. And in every study, we should keep an eye that also these classical virtues are not in the background, and we only see the technical issues. So last thing that leads already, new work. We have been talking a lot about new work. We know that this transformation in the labor markets, this huge shifts there of 1,000 kind of qualifications we do not need anymore and others we need. But of course, we can only create new work by new learning. And what do I mean by new learning? I think it's far more connected. It connects networks, learning spaces, opportunities, and institutions beyond formal educational institutions. Put the learner in the center and make a network of possibilities around him and her, and you have a lot in the direction of good learning. It's lifelong, it's an orientation to life phases. So the learner goes through this life in different phases, and the 20-year-old needs something else than the 45-year-old, but they all need learning. And it must be participative. People must be involved. As I told you, interest-led, individualized. I'm the one who learns. I can only be supported. So what we did, and that's my last remark, in Hagen, that we try to focus the attention of our colleagues of the other universities on this idea of new learning. Think about what good learning is about, and then in the next step, say what kind of technology might help me with that philosophy. So we put together 12 theses and ideas for new learning. Here you have them in an overview. So it's about lifelong. That is something that redirects our mindset if we really think about lifelong. It's about equal opportunities. Do we use them? It's about learners at the center, the other roles of teachers, network, self-directed, and it's more individualized. I can say my individual goals. Of course, we see the technology as an opportunity without ignoring risks, and we focus on these competencies. Data literacy is a big focus in Germany nowadays. And of course, we have a data protection issue, but what is politically interesting, it overcomes the boundaries between educational institutions. And we think that it requires a new, more collaborative educational policy. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Rector Pellert. Ada, thank you so much for that. If anybody would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and I'd be delighted to come to you. We will, oh, I have to put my camera on as well. There we go. Oh, here I am. and I'd be delighted to come to you for a couple of questions. So I found that absolutely fascinating. And my first question is, Rector Pellert, we'd love to have a copy of the Hagen Manifesto. If we might, we'll share that in the report on today's event so that people who are madly scribbling to try and get the 12 ideas down will have a chance to study that in detail. That would be absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. Not seeing any questions yet. Hopefully somebody is going to chunk through, but in the meantime, I'd like to just ask you a question. One of the things we've learned from this period, again, being quite challenged, as everybody else has been, is that there are some things that translate really fantastically. And these things, as you've talked about, critical thinking, the discussions where you're talking about something that is really a bit on the edge, where you're pushing people, where people have to go out on the walking the plank. This is quite difficult. How do you manage that so that people, particularly those who don't know each other so well, can actually have a full engagement in the discussion?
Yes, I think you're perfectly right. So we are talking about blended learning. I think in the end, we need to think, and then quality increases, what content in what format. And if we, as you said in the beginning, have a conversion of these different formats, then we start to think, so where do I really need to meet physically? There are a lot of reasons for that. But don't tell me that putting 800 people in an Audimax at 8 o'clock in the morning is fueling their personnel development. So I think we have to be more precise. It's not black and white, online or presence. Exactly as you said, for instance, the young students, the socializing. Of course, we all feel how they are suffering if they can't meet. But for instance, my 40-year-old business woman, says, hey, I know that. I just want a really straight program to go along. So I think in the end, it's blended. And when we really think about the question, which content in which format, then we have a quality increase in higher education. That's it all. What's it all about?
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. So, Kristin, I saw you put a question in. Was that an intended one? Kristin was Kristin Ingolfsdottir. You wanted to ask a question. Are you still keen to do that? No, I don't hear. Okay. Sondan Durakanoglu would like to ask a question. Please speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Dear Rector, you're right. The platform is changing. My question is that I am in the teaching. Yes, we have 50, 60 students on internet, but the way we are teaching is still same. We just changed the platform. Before, we used to put the student in the auditorium and the professor is teaching. Now we have the whole class on the screen and we still teach the way we used to teach. How we're going to change this? This is the big question, I suppose.
Thank you very much.
Exactly. I think that's exactly that. We first have to think, if we just transform what we do in presence into digital formats, I mean, not much is gained. So that's why we really have to take now the time to reflect what's going on. And for instance, somebody is asking in the FNQ, why didn't you mention the quality of teaching and learning? And because I think that's the overall topic. We made this 12th thesis because we think this is needed for increasing the quality of teaching and learning. And I would very much, would be happy if we use this crisis experience to increase the quality in that sense.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Christina Ulenius, former rector of Hochschule Karlstadt and board member. Christina. Can we turn the microphone on, please, for Christina Ulenius, please? Somebody. The moment, or do I have to do that? Oh. I don't know how to do that. Can somebody please, can our admin please?
I'm doing it myself. So now it's okay, is it?
Yes, we hear you.
Fine. Well, thank you for an interesting presentation, and it's so nice to be able to join this webinar. I think we have heard quite a lot about blended learning for so many years, and I would join you in the hope that this special situation is increasing our understanding of it and promoting it. But I think I heard you say that using the digital technology also makes it easier to work across institutional barriers or something, and that started me thinking whether you are talking about educational programs like a degree program, or are you more talking about individual courses that lifelong learning, and people are coming in for a certain amount of getting a better knowledge in something. I think so. I was really curious what you thought of when you had that expression, going across the borders of institutions.
Yeah. I think if we as universities accompany the learners on a lifelong journey, we always have to say, okay, in the first they are looking for full degree programs, and they are happy to be on campus, and I mean, there's also about getting to knowing the others, getting social competences and so on. But then you move on, and then there are maybe only smaller programs you need just to make some new experience in your original field, or to gather some new experiences, or you change. You say, I now want to see a completely new road, because we have at least 5 different phases in our professional life. So I always like this idea of modules that you can combine for your personal pathway, and this will increase, and we should be, as universities, more open to the contents of others, and have a look, is it according to our quality standards? But do we really have to produce all the content ourselves? Or is there not a lot about content sharing, now that we know how difficult it is to produce really advanced or professional multimedia content?
Really good question. And I think our president, Gülsün Saglama, wants to ask us a question sort of in that direction. Gülsün, would you like to come and join us? That would be great. Thank you so much. How can we allow her to speak? And so, Gülsün, can you just click your microphone and see if that works?
It's okay now?
Can we see you?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Sarah for the wonderful introduction, and then our very interesting speaker, very interesting speech we have had. My question is related to the last slide. You mentioned 12 theses. As far as I catch, there was no quality issue among those 12 theses, although you mentioned about quality issues when you were answering the Sondan's question. But still, I mean, how can we be sure that this blended learning will create better quality teaching and learning? Because it is all over the world, is a new experience, because it was a widely spread issue all around the world. But this time, all the universities have to go into this direction. So how are we going to be sure about the quality? So do you have any concrete idea, or it will evolve throughout the years in front of us? What's your idea about this quality issue?
I really hope that the institutions take some time to reflect their experiences now. I mean, the most jumped just in and organized it, and it was a big success under the circumstances. But now I think it would be the second wave, in a way, that we say, okay, what does this mean for my institution? Do I want to be hybrid? Do I want to be as I was before? What do I take into my learning portfolio? What are the experiences. Only then we will make teaching better. Only then. If we just, I mean, there are many that say, please, please let the day come when it can be so like it was yesterday. That's human, but I don't think that is the way to increase the quality. And of course, I think the answers will be different for Zurich and for Hagen, and the answers, there will be a spectrum. But if you're an outstanding higher education institution in the 21st century, you can't say, I don't deal with that. So we have to deal with that. And I really hope that we organize also from the rectors, you're all rectors, some support for this, for sorting these experiences.
May I just add one more thing, Sarah?
Yes, so we must move after this very quick question from you.
Well, you know that all the teaching and learning processes are accredited by certain, authorities. So do you know that already there is a process which accredits the blended or online learning? I don't know.
That's a super good question. I think that is exactly what has to be adjusted and aligned. That is not the case at the moment, as are many. I mean, I'm here in Germany. There's a lot of legal regulations around the universities. How is the teaching load counted and described? This is all not fitting to what we are experiencing. And I think you're perfectly right. We have to adjust those criteria.
So we have a lot to do, I think.
Thank you, Wilson. You always, as usual, you've put your finger on the spot. And those of us who are on the accreditation councils, like I am in Switzerland, will have our work to do. So thank you so much for that. Rector Pellert, thank you so much for that fascinating presentation and the answering of the questions. And we will come back to those who have still got unanswered questions. We'll come back in the panel at the end, if you don't mind, because I'd now like to move on to our second speaker, Jennifer Sparrow, who is, I'm sure, going to put her camera on in a minute. And we're thrilled to have Jennifer with us from the East Coast of the United States. We all know life there has been quite challenging of late, so it's lovely to see you, Jennifer. We wish you all the best with your new government and presidency. This is all, I think, quite exciting, and we're looking forward to it. So Jennifer's had a fascinating career. She started off after she graduated in a productivity consulting firm in Florida. She then went on to Argosy University, Florida Gulf Coast University in various roles, assistant director of e-learning. Then she's been to Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, always moving up on online and emerging technologies and knowledge ventures and all sorts of innovative learning. And now she is at the Pennsylvania State University in University Park, that very important state for your president, yes, exactly, yes. Where she is the Deputy Chief Information Officer. Recently, congratulations on your promotion.
Thank you.
She's also the Associate Vice President for Teaching and Learning with Technology, and she's a Senior Director also before that, Teaching and Learning with Technology. Jennifer, we're absolutely thrilled. And also, I should just say she's had lots of prizes, but she won the EDUCAUSE Rising Star in 2013. So her star has risen, and we're going to hear from her today. Jennifer, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And such a pleasure to be here. Good morning and good afternoon to you all from Pennsylvania, the United States. Yes, I appreciate, Sarah, that Pennsylvania in particular has been quite a force in making sure that we had a nice change of power in Washington, D.C. And I will take a few minutes to share a little bit with what Penn State was doing prior to COVID, what we did during COVID and certainly post-COVID. But let me get my slides up here. Hang tight for just 1 second. I just want to make sure I'm in the right spot before I share those. And sorry, I have a lot of windows open, so let me get that going here. And are you all seeing my slides now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, excellent. So thanks for the opportunity to talk with you all. I was really thrilled to be able to just do some reflection on what we were doing at Penn State prior to COVID, why we were doing it with blended learning. how that helped our shift to during COVID, and then what I hope the future will hold for us post-COVID. And I think you'll see a lot of alignment with the prior presentation, and particularly a focus on our end on how do we know it's working? What are the evaluation pieces, again, as we think about what's next for us? And certainly pre-COVID, we had taken a pretty interesting look at blended learning. We actually created a blended learning transformation here at Penn State. Our annual strategic plan talks about transforming education. So we frame the work that we do around that strategic plan. And we were looking at blended learning for a variety of reasons. One was we had some institutional barriers, as were mentioned before. So we had some shared courses and some shared programs across campuses. So if you're not familiar with Penn State, we are 24 campuses geographically diverse, and the state of Pennsylvania is kind of like a rectangle. And if you did a giant wide U around the state of Pennsylvania, you would see that we had campuses in almost every part of the state, minus this little part in the center upper right, or a center upper center part of the state. And we have many of our campuses actually share courses among them. And so we might have campuses that are 80 kilometers apart, but they have shared courses. And what we heard from the faculty that were teaching in those shared courses is they wanted to make sure that students at both locations had a similar experience, right? So we weren't having course delivery face-to-face in one location with simply a remote delivery in the remote locations, but that the students were mixing and mingling, that the assignments and the group activities were designed with this idea that everybody got the same experience. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. Additionally, we have some space constraints here at Penn State. I'm sure all of you do. We have some large enrollment lecture halls that seat up to 700 students. And then we have, some other classes that are in high demand, but we can't get them into those spaces. And so space constraints were a reason why we started to look at blended learning, because we were able to take a half or a third of the class, meet in a smaller space, and be able still to deliver the content like we're doing currently today. And then we wanted to offer some ideas around flexibility for our students. So again, we have some campuses that are in some pretty remote locations of the state. And if students were not residential students, if they were living in the communities, they may have a longer commute to campus. And if they were coming to campus to participate with 2 or 3 remote students, could we duplicate what was happening in a face-to-face setting with those students so they didn't have to make that drive or that commute to campus? And finally, and I think this is part of what we're thinking about longer term, and we think about the technologies that support this, is we really wanted to take it from the teaching and learning perspective. And how do we create active learning, even in these large enrollment classes, if that's the case, or in these smaller classes, in a way that allows those students to have the student to faculty connection and the student to student connection that we know makes for good academic outcomes. And so we were really thinking about this from these perspectives, and we started on a small scale thinking about blended learning. And I'll talk a little bit and do a deeper dive into that blended learning transformation as we move through here. And then we had this, and I'm going to go back here for just 1 second. So the pendulum here really was swung very far to the left. Here we had some faculty that had embraced this idea. We had some faculty that were, all in. I want to do this. I want to make sure this is good for our students, right? We want to provide the best academic experience that we have. But we had a lot of faculty who weren't interested in this at all. So this pendulum had swung to one end, right? I'm not going to use the technology. This isn't for me. It's not in my wheelhouse. I prefer to give that, face-to-face lecture and of 400 years ago, and keep it that way. And then we've gone during COVID, and like Sarah, I think we had a little more than 83 hours. We announced that we were going remote on a Wednesday and started on a Monday morning. That Wednesday happened to be our spring break, so a lot of folks were out of town or on vacation, and coming back into this really gave them 24 to 48 hours to make the shift to fully remote instruction last March. And we made that shift to fully remote instruction. That pendulum swung to the other end of the spectrum, right? So faculty who hadn't used the technology, who hadn't thought about how technology can enable teaching and learning differently, were now having to be fully immersed in that. And we'll spend some time thinking about that piece of it as we go on. But then sort of post that spring semester, as we looked into summer and into the fall, we returned to a face-to-face teaching environment, but we had to do so with social distancing. And so all of those classes that were taught in those large enrollment lecture halls, anything over 250 went fully remote. Anything less than 250, we found a space on campus where you could have 1/2 or 1/3 of the students, depending on whether your class was Tuesday, Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday, which in person, and then the rest of the students would participate via Zoom, just as we are now. And we got there, right? We did this in a, maybe not the most planful way, and maybe not with the most support for faculty and students, but we did it. And I think there's kudos to be had all around for the incredible work that was done, both in supporting our faculty and supporting our students to ensure that they had the resources necessary. But what I think is really interesting in this during COVID, and we think about what's happening in these spaces and what we are finding our faculty are reporting, is that because they've thought about their teaching differently, because they've thought about 1/2 or 2/3 of the students being remote, while 1/3 or 1/2 are being in person, we've got some really interesting case studies here that are being shared broadly among our faculty. And so things like, I want to do a small group assignment during class. So we're engaging those students. We've got those active learning strategies that we know are so critical, but we're able to bring those in. And if we have the students in the classroom are on Zoom and the students at the remote are on Zoom, we found that faculty are creating breakout rooms, and you get the students into the breakout rooms, you get a discussion question going. The students have to report back through a variety of formats. And it's really interesting to watch this engagement happen, right? And you think about the shift from even 150 student class. You can't really do small group discussion. You can, right? Have them turn to their neighbors, discuss, report out. Did it change their mind, right? These active learning things that were happening are now happening across space, right? So they may be students that are in the classroom currently. There may be students that are remote learning in town here, or there may be students that are remote learning half a world away. And so we're excited to see what our faculty are doing, how they're embracing it, how we can support that, and how might those strategies carry forward. And that's where I think we're really looking at, what does this post-COVID space look like, and what are our opportunities in this space? And I think Ada mentioned it, right? We certainly don't want this pendulum to swing all the way back over to the one side where we're not leveraging the technologies at all, and we're not using what we've learned in terms of what's possible in this space. And we can leverage some of that to think creatively about how might we move forward and what are those opportunities. We're seeing among our administration here at Penn State less of an interest in investing in rebuilding and redesigning large enrollment lecture halls. So we have a particular building on campus here. It has 4 lecture halls, 500 seats each. It's aging. It's been on deferred maintenance for several years, and the cost to redo that space as a traditional lecture hall really becomes moot if we can think about how we might do things differently now because of blended learning. And then again, we've seen faculty start to adopt more active learning practices in this remote arena or this blended arena that we're currently in. And we're hoping to take that leverage and that knowledge, and certainly the technology comfort that our faculty and students have gained, to parlay that into something interesting. And so we'll talk to you a little bit about how we're continuing to support this and what this looks like moving forward for Penn State. As I mentioned before, COVID, we had this great blended learning transformation, which was a series of faculty engagement opportunities and resources that helped faculty think about, what does it mean to create my course from a blended learning perspective? And we sort of thought about this in 4 ways, with thinking about, what does this mean from a faculty perspective, and what does this mean from a student perspective? But certainly from the faculty perspective, we were looking at sort of an exposure to what is blended learning. So there's a pedagogical knowledge here. What does this mean? What is it? How does it impact my particular teaching discipline, my domain? There's an instructional design component. So how do I change my learning how do I change my course design now that I know what blended learning is and what the benefits of it are? There's an IT component. So what are the technologies that I need to have to support this, and how do we support that as an organization? And then finally, there's a research component. So how do I know this is positively impacting, or at least not negatively impacting, my students? And so we'll talk about how we put those things into place for our faculty. So we have these redesigned courses for blended delivery here. You'll notice from the picture here that we did those face-to-face. We weren't eating our own dog food, as we'd like to say here. We were actually face-to-face. We brought the faculty together to think about what does it mean to design your courses for a blended modality. And we took them through a series of blended workshop series. We had a Blend LT learning path, which was a series of self-paced modules. And I'll share those with you, and those will be available. They're on the web, so they'll be widely available for anybody who wants to leverage those if you're thinking about blended learning at your institution. But these are really great just-in-time resources. I'm teaching something and I want to be able to leverage it. I'm not sure what I remember from that. I can go back and get that just in time. And then we really wanted to think about that continuing support from the part of the organization, TLT, which is Teaching and Learning with Technology here at Penn State. What is the ongoing support? And I think that's a critical piece. And as we think about how we implement these large scale changes that are going to be long lasting, that support piece is going to be critical. We'll spend a few minutes on that as well. I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive into this learning path so you had some idea about how we provided this support for faculty. So we had this sort of, what does it mean to walk through this from a faculty member that has maybe no idea about what blended learning is to this, how do I evaluate and maintain my blended course? How do I build it? How do I plan for it? What are the effective assessments that go along with this? And again, this final piece of designing student-centered learning activities and engagement, or that active learning piece. So we're getting there in terms of this development. We have a free ebook available through our Penn State library that can be borrowed for up to 365 days. This isn't the be-all and end-all, but this book, The Blended Course Design Workshop by Catherine Linder, is certainly a great place to start these conversations. As you think about, getting faculty ready to buy into this, what this looks like, right? We want to have some expectations around what does a blended learning course look like? And again, I think we heard this already from Ada and Sarah. This is not just simply taking the course and delivering your lecture online and then doing something face-to-face, right? This is a thoughtful process of what makes sense to be face-to-face, what could be done maybe in a pre-recorded lecture, but most importantly, what are those engaged activities that are afforded now that I have taken some of that lecture out of the time that we would spend together? And just blended learning basics right here. What is blended learning? What are the fundamentals of this? How does a faculty member here at Penn State do this, right? And so you can see here, there's links to outside courses. University of Central Florida, they've got a blended learning toolkit as well. Lots of great resources there. How do you plan for this? What are the basics of good course design, and what is it about course goals and learning objectives, and how do we start our course design from that space? We know that our faculty are subject matter experts in their domain knowledge, but we're not always great about preparing them to be good faculty members. And we know that writing course goals and learning objectives goes back to this good course design. And so we do cover some of that in our blended learning transformation. Again, assessments. So this is not assessment of the blended learning, but this is assessment of student learning, and why this is important and how you start to assess blended learning becomes a critical piece of what we're talking about here. Designing student-centered learning activities and engagement. And again, this is about this idea that we want students to be active and engaged learners in this process. Again, not just simply listening to a lecture and going off and doing work, but what are those types of activities that I can include? And one of the great things about these courses is we generally bring in a diverse set of faculty. So they're not just engineering faculty, they're not just, psychology, they're not just a business, right? We bring in diverse sets. So there might be faculty from all disciplines around the university. And it's interesting to watch the conversations around, hey, what might work in engineering might need to be tweaked a little bit, but could certainly be leveraged in business, right? And that sharing and that evolution of the activities across disciplines is really fascinating. And to have the conversations post getting your course to a blended format, and what happens in terms of this, the faculty member says, wow, this really worked for me, or this didn't work for me, and how that helps other faculty evolve in what they're doing. This promoting social presence, I'll talk about a little bit more as we talk about the student piece of this, but it's about how do we help our students create community, and how do we help our faculty understand what that community looks like. And then we want to provide a series of resources for our faculty, because again, we don't need to reinvent the wheel on this, right? People are doing this already. But because we've swung that pendulum over to where faculty are utilizing this technology, in many cases, they're doing some sort of blended learning now. How do we take this moment in time and amplify it so that we don't swing that pendulum all the way back over to where we were pre-COVID? And then again, this piece here, which I think is the critical piece here, is evaluating and maintaining your blended course. So we want to make sure that there's some evaluation before launch. This includes things like, are my materials ready for our accessibility standards? So will they meet the needs of our learners that have disabilities? And how do we maintain and improve that course semester to semester? And we think about this from a continuous improvement process. And we really want faculty to be able to be in a space where they can do that. One of the things we've developed as a part of this is our Tech TA program. And this started off as simply a sort of a Zoom helper. If you can imagine this, this is the person as a faculty member went to Zoom, they would be able to go in now and have a Tech TA elbow to elbow, but obviously remotely, to do things like we see today, right? Mute participants, start video, start chat, breakout rooms. And that way the faculty can focus on this teaching and learning, and the Tech TA can focus on the technologies. And we see that evolving as we get to a point of more blended learning, less of our remote teaching, that these Tech TAs will become not just about Zoom, but about all of the technology tools that we have in place at Penn State and beyond, that will allow our students to be a part of the engaged part of the teaching. And one last thing I want to bring in here, which is just about thinking about our students. And we wanted to ensure that our students, as we went remote, had both the technology and the internet access that was needed in order to be effective learners. And so we did a lot of scrambling when we went to that fully remote. We made sure that students have these technologies through a variety of loaner programs. Moving forward, we're going to look and see what that means for, if we're doing more blended learning. Are our students coming prepared with the technologies and the internet access that they need to do that? And we want to talk about in depth, how do we help 18 to 22-year-olds build community? And what does that mean for faculty development? So if our students are used to building community online through these computer-mediated technologies, but our faculty are still thinking they need to be, again, as I think Sarah mentioned, 400 students in a classroom, those are different ways to build community. And maybe this online community is better for some or all of our students in some situations. So what's the future? I think that's the biggest thing for us, is where does that pendulum swing land, and how do we as an institution support our faculty so we don't end up all the way back at the sort of non-technology enabled end of our teaching. So those are my slides. I'll stop sharing and available for questions.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. That was also absolutely fascinating. Wonderful. Does anybody want to start with a question? I'm only going to take two so that we can then press on. I can see we've got one from Gulsun. Gulsun, please ask the question.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I have two questions. One is written one, but the first one will be directly related to my architectural background. You said that you have 24 campuses and many classrooms with huge capacities. And if pandemic goes away, I mean, there is a strong links between the requirements and the buildings and the campus size and campus opportunities. So some of the buildings and some of the facilities will be useless if it goes on like this, if pandemic goes on, and then we have to think about existing infrastructure. How are we going to use them? This is an important question. But if pandemic goes away, shall we continue online teaching or blended teaching, or shall we go back to our old practices, or will there be a kind of two-way combined together what's your future expectations about, pandemic and in relation to built environment, in relation to way of teaching in future?
Yeah, I hope we land somewhere in the middle. So we're not back to just how we were doing it, and we're not, thinking we can only do it the way we're doing it during the pandemic, right? That we settle someplace in the middle, and where faculty are willing and where we're able to provide both the instructional design and the faculty development and the tech support, and faculty think, gosh, I could do something different. How might I re-envision what I'm doing so it doesn't just include, my lecture to 400 students, but maybe I, lecture to 150 on Monday and 150 on Wednesday and 100 on Friday, and we have some engaged activities that happen in place of what would normally be happening in this 400 student lecture hall. So on my campus, I see there's an opportunity for us to redesign some of these large spaces to have, fewer seats, movable, so you can, turn to your neighbor and have, a conversation with 3 or 4 students, and you do these group activities. And maybe that is enabled with the technology, so there's a combination of sort of in-person group work, and then the students that are remote that day are doing group work in breakout rooms within Zoom. Maybe the students that aren't in class on Monday and Wednesday are doing something different while they're getting, while they're not in class from the students that are in class. And that in-class time allows that faculty member to be present, to have, to walk around, to answer questions as they're doing this problem solving, and really thinking about what are those higher order skills. We talked about this, right? Creative thinking, critical problem solving, right? These are the things we want our students to practice, not how to sit in the lecture hall and take notes. And so I'm hopeful that we're on the precipice of something really creative here as we think about the fall semester. And so we're thinking about that as an institution. A lot of it will do with convincing our faculty that there's a nice middle place here, and we've got the resources to support them as they go forward.
We're with you, Jennifer, and we're in exactly the same place with our colleagues. This is a huge challenge. One of the things that we have done is invested a lot in trying to educate the young professors, and that's what our next speaker will also be talking a little bit about. So a huge thank you to Jennifer. Thank you so much. We would all be busy clapping, all of you, and thank you so much. And we'll now move on to our third speaker, Karin Brown, who is an educational developer at ETH Zurich. She regularly teaches faculty development courses at all career stages. And in response to the COVID crisis, she developed new courses for teaching assistants and for faculty on teaching online. She holds degrees from the City University of New York, Hunter College, and Te Vananga o Aotearoa, which is finishing a Maori-speaking university of tertiary education. Before coming to ETH, she worked as a program leader in curriculum development at the Open Polytechnic of New Zealand. And I just want to share with you, there is one word in Maori that I know, and that is Aotearoa, which means basically the long white cloud. So that is actually New Zealand University. And welcome, Karin. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you for that welcome. Kia ora, which is how you say hello in Maori. To all of you. I would just like to, first of all, apologize that I'm only joining you now. I managed to hear the last sort of 10 minutes or so of Jennifer Sparrow's talk, and it sounds like we have got many of the same ideas. And I feel like I'm in illustrious company here today. So I feel the need to explain to you just a few words about who I am. And as Sarah's already said, I'm a faculty developer, so I'm not somebody who creates strategy. I'm not someone who's usually sitting around the table when it comes to those discussions. So I feel a bit like I'm reporting from the field. I just today, in fact, 20 minutes ago, finished teaching our latest course to incoming assistant professors. So I spent all day today, Thursday and Friday with them, talking to them about how they could develop their teaching practice here at ETH. And so I bring a I bring that particular view, which is very much informed by what I see our teaching staff struggling with, the questions they ask, and the challenges they face. So that's the perspective I bring today. So I also have some slides prepared, of course, and I will share those with you now. I think this idea of rethinking time and space is a reoccurring theme that you have probably already heard from the previous speakers, and I'll be touching on it a little bit as we go. I wanted to make a few points in the beginning, but I'm going to round it off by talking much more about how we work with our assistant professors in order to embrace teaching online and teaching in a blended way. So as I'm sure you've already discussed, there is this sense of, as time has gone on, there was this pre-corona time, which was classroom-based, some blending if we were lucky. If we were lucky, our learning management system was more than just a place to save PDFs. But if we were unlucky, or if staff were short of time, that's what they would use their online environments for. And of course, now we are in this online only environment during Corona, where you either teach online or you don't teach at all. And it has become this great unfreezing moment, or what I also like to call a liminal moment in history, where we are aware of what is possible much more than pre-Corona. Pre-Corona, it may have been quite difficult to encourage staff to adopt online teaching strategies, but now the world is simply unthinkable without them. And of course, the post-Corona is the big question. What's going to happen then, and how will we be teaching, which is very much what we're here to discuss today. So I have a few thoughts on this online-only context, and then I have a few thoughts on the post-Corona, especially in the context of working with our staff. So the first thing is that, of course, during this Corona time, we started off very much in what we know as the emergency remote teaching phase. During the first semester of teaching online, faculty were asking us questions like, how do I import student lists from one system to another? Or how do I upgrade my Zoom account from the free account to the business account? Very technically driven questions, which I believe is a point that Jennifer made before. Then we moved into a better remote teaching phase, where staff started asking questions like, well, how can I encourage participation? And this very much showed us that they started thinking beyond just the technical questions and more about didactical questions. And now in the third stage, or the third semester of teaching online, we really need to be moving into more of a sound online educational model. So staff are coming with questions like, how can I actually plan a good online course? And we are now in a position of trying to answer these questions for them. We also just simply do not know how long we will still be in this online teaching phase. And as much as many of us yearn to go back to the classroom, we might still be here for quite a long time, depending on how things evolve with the vaccines or with additional variants. And so, while at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw some universities were taking a let's wait it out strategy. So in Germany, there were even some universities that just decided to scrap the entire semester. That simply isn't feasible in the long term. So we know that the quality of online education needs to increase at our institutions, and faculty developers are really the ones who are best placed to help that happen. So we need to help this quality increase. And I have three thoughts as to how we've been doing that at ETH, which I believe will probably echo what you've been sharing as well. And the first one is just to facilitate an exchange amongst teaching staff, to ensure that they are able to enter into dialogue with one another about what works and what doesn't work. And we do this by offering a lunchtime seminar called Refresh Teaching. You can find this on our website, refreshteaching.eth.ch. And what happens here is that we invite staff to talk about their experiences, their experiments, their reviews of online teaching tools. And we very much just act as hosts. So we invite these speakers in, and they share their experiences of teaching online. And this creates a conversation. We record these videos, and they're all available on our website for people to watch at their own time. What's interesting is when before we were virtual, we ran about 9 events a year, and we would have a consistent participation around 30 to 40 people, depending on the topic. Our attendance jumped from 40 people to 120 and has evened out around the 80 people per session. We hosted over lunch, which makes it relatively easy for people to drop in and out. This exchange between faculty is really valued, because it's very different if I sit there in front of faculty and say, here's what the theory tells us about online teaching. Or if another assistant professor sits there and says, well, here's what I found works for me and my students. They ask each other much more differentiated questions. The second thing I think is absolutely essential is obviously to offer professional development opportunities. The model that we are using at ETH is very much one based on voluntary attendance. At this point, I just want to say, I have a dog and 2 cats at home, and I just need to let my dog out because my family have returned home. So this collapsing of the personal and the professional, I think it can be quite charming. So offering professional development. So in our case, we created this Introduction to Online Teaching course, which is very much a choice-based, choose your own adventure course, as I say. It allows faculty to select the issues or the questions that they are specifically interested in, shown here by the section called What are your pressing questions? And only then does it reveal those later segments to them. So if you have a faculty member who says, I'm only interested in planning, then that's all they'll see. But if you have someone who's also interested in how to create a conducive atmosphere for learning, then they will see that as well. The online course is open for everyone. They can enroll, they can browse through the course, they can leave if they like. But then we offer optional workshops so that they can come together with their very specific questions about their own teaching context. So we offer the workshops at the beginning of each semester, and they bring their specific questions that they have not yet answered in the course. And in the workshop, they work in groups to answer those questions and to get feedback from their colleagues. So that is the professional development offer that we have. A centralized one, I should say. We have decentralized offers as well in the various departments. The next thing that I think is really essential is that we need to be deliberately engaging in evidence gathering and reflection on what works and what doesn't work. And we've actually built that into this course. So I've just highlighted at the end here. We have a final reflection task that we ask the participants to engage in. So they learn the theory, they discuss it in the workshop, and then they apply it in their teaching. And it is only if they write a final reflection on what worked or didn't work that they receive the certificate. And so this has been how we are encouraging staff to think about what's working so that we can also document that and make it visible to others. This also gives us, the educational developers, a bit of a bird's eye view, so we can see what the different people are reporting as being effective and if there are any patterns that we need to be aware of. One way that we as educational developers in our team, one way that we are approaching the evidence gathering task is that we are planning to interview staff to find out more about how they are making choices about their teaching. So we are asking them, how did you used to teach in a classroom context? How are you teaching right now in this online context? But crucially, how do you plan to teach post-corona and why? So we know that there's a lot of theory out there about blended learning. There's increasingly research about, obviously in this intensive online teaching time. But what we are really interested in is why are teaching staff or why are our faculty choosing what they take with them and what they don't take with them. We have a lot of confidence that they will be making deliberate decisions, and we want to try to understand what are their reasons for taking the best of both worlds into their new blended context when that actually happens. So by selecting faculty who have completed courses with us, we know that they will be considered and informed about good teaching practice. We won't have to explain to them what's a learning objective because they have been through a rigorous training. So this is one project that we are launching within my unit, where we can really find out more about the deliberate reasons why faculty will be choosing to teach in the blended way that they're choosing. So that's the sort of during Corona time. And the post-Corona is, of course, the big question. And again, I think here it is really important to take an institutional approach to this. I think there will be many, many good examples of what works in blended learning or academic articles about the best way to approach blended learning. But when I work with faculty, I feel that what seems to be the most effective is when I give them as much autonomy as possible. So I go through 3 key principles with them. These will be familiar to you. The first key principle is I ask them to rethink time. What is it that needs to happen at the same time? And what is it that can happen at individualized times? And the reason why I think this is really important to put back into the hands of faculty is, my example is that at ETH, the majority of the people I work with are natural scientists. They're engineers, they're mathematicians, they're physicists, they're biologists. My background is actually in social services. In social sciences, I studied social work in New Zealand. And I believe that a biologist will prioritize different activities for shared time than maybe a social worker would. And so I don't want to go to the staff and say, these are the 5 things you should prioritize for shared time, and these are the 5 things you should prioritize for separate time. I believe this is a decision that they can make on their own. The next one, of course, is rethinking space. What is it that has to happen in a communal space, and what is it that can happen in a personalized space? What is it that can't be virtualized or can't be virtualized cheaply enough? And then, and for me, this one is really, really important, is to remember the human aspect of teaching and learning. So anything they do, they need to be aware of accessibility. In online space is still space. They need to be aware of cognitive load. They need to be aware of the psychological demands that learning has. They need to be aware of our psychological needs. So things like motivation, or the incredible demands that the current pandemic situation is creating for our students. So reminding them to remember that our students are human and they are very much suffering as well through this pandemic, and being aware of the cognitive load is incredibly important. Sometimes we experience that faculty think, well, this is great, I'll put a video online, an hour-long video, they should watch it before they come to my Zoom lecture, and then we'll talk again for another hour, and they effectively end up doubling the amount of time. So this becomes a very important aspect to emphasize to them. It's only then that I really talk to them about technology. First, finding out what their teaching goals are, and secondly, talking about the time and space aspect, and only then do we really start identifying which technology will assist them to achieve their learning goals. For example, in the course I've just come from, for many of our, especially the newer teaching staff, they still come from a context or a tradition in some of our neighboring countries, for example, where the teaching is very much frontal. And so the paradigm shift that they have to go through from being the sage on the stage to being the guide on the side is one that really takes a significant amount of time. And I think Jennifer also mentioned earlier that we have this issue where sometimes people are so expert in what they do that they find it hard to break down what they know for novices. And so these are all equally important steps that will help inform the way that they teach. This is a tool that I'm putting together at the moment. It is actually a prototype. If you would like to give me feedback on it, I'm very much open to feedback. But this is based on a book which came out in 2014 called Learning Online, What Research Tells Us About Whether, When, and How. And in that book, they really summarized research on the effectiveness of online learning. You'll be pleased to know they concurred that online learning is equally, if not more effective than face-to-face learning. But in order to compare the various research that they had identified, they had to create these variables or identify factors that were going to be consistent across the different teaching contexts that they were evaluating. And so this is a tool that I'm planning on using with staff when they say to me that they need to plan a course that will be blended. I will ask them to consider these different aspects and how much they wish to apply these. So these are a bit like sliders. They can say, well, my course will be fully online, or maybe it will be completely blended, so like a 50-50, or maybe it will be mostly online with just a little bit of a face-to-face component. I can talk to them about the communication methods that they plan on using. Will it be synchronous or asynchronous? the pacing, whether it's a fixed pace cohort or whether this is something students can do completely in their own time, and what the role is of the instructors. Are they actively teaching, passively supporting? In addition, the idea of the didactic concept is one that they should also be thinking about ahead of time. Will it be mainly will it be exposition based, or they will be providing input or exercises, group work, or simulations? Of course, this then has an impact on what the students are doing. Will the students be mainly listening and reading, or will they be collaborating in group work? By asking these questions ahead of time, it's going to give the lecturers building blocks that they can use to start planning their courses. So we haven't provided something as structured as what I saw Jennifer showing, but rather that we are trying to teach them how to think about teaching so that they can go off and create a course that works for them. One thing we've learned in our institution is that it is very successful when we really understand and promote the expertise that the lecturers have as lecturers in their own course. So I don't go in there and presume to know what's going to work best in their course. Instead, I try to empower them to think didactically about their teaching. And the feedback is of course a very important component as well. Are you asking students to self-reflect using specific criteria, or is it peer feedback? Does the feedback come from instructors, or is it automatic, such as through automatic quizzes or codes, or potentially it's some kind of artificial intelligence as well, and the role of assessments? So this is the next step for us, which is really giving lecturers a tool that they can then use to think about their courses in a blended way, because these sliders will move depending on individual circumstances that they have. So we hope that this approach will empower them so that they can think about their learning, think about themselves as instructors, and think about the way that they shape their courses that is unique to each instructor, but also therefore the best possible fit. I think that is my last slide.
Thank you very much, Karin. Fascinating, as usual. So thank you so much for that. And we'd love to hear whether or not anybody has any questions for you. Please, does anybody put up your blue hand? Because we're very keen to hear a little bit more from Karin. Okay, well, I'll ask you an intermediate question since everybody's being a bit shy at the moment. Karin, I know that we've made one of my big things as rector has been to encourage the assistant professors to come and train with you. Tell us a little bit about what happened when it started. It started 18 years ago, and we had 133 ETH professors have enrolled in your courses over that time. But over the last 5 years, you've had 57 assistant professors. So tell me about the revolution that is happening at the moment, that the younger professors are so interested in teaching as well as in their research. Share a few thoughts on that from your freshly baked experience from today, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to just add to those numbers you quoted, because of the currently employed professors at ETH, about 130 have completed the course, but over the 18 years or so that this course has been running, over 500 people have, of course, moved through it. So part of what that means is that we've been able to build up a lot of experience in terms of understanding the unique challenges that particularly assistant professors have at ETH. You know, they're looking for tenure, there's certain pressures, they're new, they're building up their labs, they're building up their research groups. So I would say our narrative of how to talk about teaching has really refined over the years. We speak really differently about teaching to assistant professors than we do to doctoral students, for example, even though we talk about exactly the same topics, learning objectives, constructive alignment, but the way we tell the story is very different. But I would argue that one of the things that has happened is that there has been a cultural shift at ETH. And at this stage, I actually have to hand that back to you, Sarah, and say that one of the things that you do is that when the new staff are appointed, they meet with you and you look them in the eye and say, we value teaching. Teaching is important to us. You should do this course. And that is one of the things that brings them to us, as well as, of course, reputation and their colleagues telling the story as to why they might think the course is valuable. But I think that general expectation in the environment that teaching is valued is incredibly important, especially in a research-intensive university.
Thank you so much, Karin. This has been one of my missions since I became rector, and in fact, the president, Joel Mezo, who is the boss of all of the professors at ETH, we have a completely crazy system. He sees all the assistant professors at their halfway term, and he asks them about teaching and about the course, and usually they're bubbling with enthusiasm. And what is even more important is that each year our students award something called a golden owl to the best teachers. And what we've seen in the last 5 years is there've been a growing number of assistant professors who have won this award. And the best teacher in the university was won last year by one of our former assistant professors who won 2 golden owls and won the Credit Suisse award for best. So I have to pass the thanks back to Karin and her colleagues. It clearly seems to have worked. Now, I think what I'd like to do is to open the floor up and ask Jennifer and Ada to put their cameras on, and then we'll see if anybody would like to ask a question to anybody. So for the last 10 minutes, the floor is open. And would anybody like to put their hand up to ask a question? And if not, I'm going to ask, if nobody else is going to say anything, since I've been talking rather a lot, I'm going to ask Ada, Jennifer and Karin maybe to ask questions to each other. Start with the first question. So who'd like to begin? Gabriela has a question. All right, I'll shut you up for the moment. I'm going to say, I'll come back to you, Ada. Gabriela Siegert from the University of Zurich, please, the floor is yours. Just turn on your own microphone, Gabriela, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you all for your presentations. That was very interesting. And my question goes to all of you. And it is about a bit more than learning. It's how do we manage a sense of belonging to a university while only having online courses or online teaching all the time? I miss this students' sense of belonging to the university. And if this is going on for more than the 3 semesters we have already, I think we will have a cohort of students that do not feel I belong to this university. Mm. And I would really ask for your advice in this. How do we manage that? Thank you very much.
Who'd like to start? Ada.
I think that's an absolutely critical question, not only in respect to students, but to the whole society. I mean, it is one of the questions that is for me crucial also as a rector concerning staff, because of course we all observe that you are losing the binding if you don't meet. So I think it's one of the major challenges to think, I mean, this is a crisis situation. We didn't opt for that, but what can we do now in this also to have more informal communication, how to invest in other forms of binding, although they will never be as of the same quality than meeting in person, but still, so we do a lot of, I don't know, having parties together online, I mean, having social meetings, trying to spare some time to talk about also informal issues, but I think that's the issue for all of us.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've been thinking about in this space again is how do we help our faculty rethink community, right? And so we know our 18 to 22-year-olds, their idea of community. Sorry, my headphones died, so you're going to hear my computer bang here. I apologize. Just like the dogs, right? It's the nexus of all of this. So just like our 18 to 22-year-olds build their community differently, right? And I do agree with you. There's a sense of I belong to this community. I belong to Penn State. I belong to this, University Park community here that we're not getting. But there may be some opportunity where I feel, as a student, I feel I'm more a part of the community because I'm not sitting in 3 large enrollment lectures with 1 smaller class, right? And that's what we find our first and second year students here at Penn State often are in these very large enrollment, very impersonal classes. And now they have an opportunity to build community like they would in their daily lives, right? They're on chat, maybe they're in small breakout rooms, right? They have an opportunity to meet with the faculty where they're not going to office hours, but they're doing this informally through Zoom. And so while I don't think it's ideal, and I don't think it helps our students understand what it means to be, our logo here is "We are Penn State." Like, what does it mean to be "We are Penn State" when we're not here? We're trying to figure out ways to do that. And my hope is that this is our last full semester of this, right? That as we go into the fall, that this will be a moot question. But building community, I think, is going to continue to be a question for how we help our faculty, particularly our faculty over 40, right? Understand that the way our students build community is different than the way we were built community.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. And I also think it's an incredibly crucial question because, in fact, expand it and make it even more difficult to answer is not just the sense of belonging to an institution, but what is the role of the institution in this context where the institution is almost invisible. So when you're on a campus, you know the main building. The main building is there, and across the street is the biology building, and chemistry's left. It gives you a cognitive structure which helps you place your learning. You have encounters that are spontaneous and random with people, which you almost can't exactly replicate online. And I, for one, am just absolutely, as a social worker originally, I'm thrilled that these questions are being asked because they were important when we were on campus as well, and we didn't necessarily have good strategies for building it then. So in some ways, maybe we're finally asking really important questions about the importance of the social and psychological well-being of our students. And it took a pandemic to make us do so.
I think that's a very good point, Karin. Ada, you were about to say something before, and please do say what you were about to say before, if you could remember that. Ada, you were about to go. All right, I have another question. Anna Freitas says she can't use the microphone.
I think now I can use the microphone. Do you?
Can Anna, come, you ask it, please.
Okay, so I just wanted to know, I mean, of course, this is a new era for all of us, so, and we are still trying to adapt. But one of my concerns is also about internationalization and mobility of students. I mean, they just don't feel that much that they have to go to different places. So the fact that they will learn different cultures, this will be an effect. This will affect even for instance, Erasmus program. How I had that. We have mobility without mobility now this year, and this is not the same thing. So I just wanted to know your ideas about this as well.
Who'd like to start with that?
I want to sort of expand on that because I think that, of course, we're not the only ones in higher education who are dealing with these very questions. I am watching my teenagers with interest, 14 and 13, who are sometimes in school, and then there might be school closures, and socializing is frowned upon, and there are all these restrictions. And as a global society, we are going to be facing these questions. And I think a lot of what we said earlier in our presentations probably still holds water in terms of gathering the evidence and documenting and publishing. I think it's incredibly important to ask the questions and seek stories that help us understand them in our institutions and then sharing them on a global level.
Marvelous. Ada.
And in a way, it also forces us to rethink not only higher education as we do tonight, but also the concept of internationalization. So what is it about? So I think there are chances via digitization, like here, you can, without traveling, meet internationally. I mean, that's a gift. On the other hand, as Anna said correctly, for certain, to dive into another culture, it's not enough to have online meetings. So you really have to live and spend. And how did you say, Karin, think about the human? I mean, but maybe it helps us to say, what kind of internationalization do we want to foster? And there are several trends or tracks.
Thank you very much, Ada. Does anybody else want to add anything to that? Very good. I'm looking a little bit at Christina, you may have the last question. Christina, please ask the question. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm diverting in an entirely different direction. It's been so interesting to listen, but with the demand on the teachers that they now go into an entirely different space, so to speak, when they digitalize their courses into blended learning, how does it change the demand on the time of the teachers? Now, my experience is far back, but the experience, I think, for a long time was that it's a much higher demand on the teachers to be available to the students, since they're all, I mean, the students are always online. And how do the teachers cope with that? If it's still true, I don't know. But I think that's it. In the early period, this was one of the difficult things for the teachers to cope with.
Comments, who'd like to begin?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think that's a great question, right? And and particularly given the debate, and we talk about humanists, let's talk about humanists for our faculty, right? I mean, they're facing not only, you know, changing their teaching and an incredible investment in the time in this, but also, you know, are they working from home with teenagers or little people, right? I mean, these are questions that in our own mental health and all of this, right? And what does that mean? And so part of what we've tried to do, and I think I mentioned this with the Tech TA programs, is how do we lighten that load? And what is the university able to do in order to, again, make this the most comfortable transition possible, and providing the supports necessary? And it sounds like Karin's doing the same thing at Zurich, right? That there are some things that we can put in place that maybe help that transition and help with, you know, gosh, if students are asking the same, you're getting 20 of the same question, do you develop an FAQ and drop it into your Canvas course, right? So that you're empowering the students to find these answers themselves. One of the greatest things I found, and this is totally student generated, right, is the students within these courses started up a GroupMe chat. And so they were asking and answering the questions as opposed to coming to the faculty member first. And so there's a great opportunity to teach our students as well, like, how do I do this for myself? How do I not have a learned helplessness around this? And so I think we're continuing to see what this looks like and continue, again, to disseminate those ideas and support our faculty accordingly. It's not perfect.
Brilliant. We love this idea of peer teaching and helping each other, because that's really rewarding, because they're explaining it in a different way, not from top down, but from peer to peer. Comments, Karin, Ada?
Yeah, I was just thinking that, you know, to respond to you, Christina, that we have, you know, the research I've read does show that faculty have invested more time in teaching than they did previously. And usually it's at the expense of personal time, not of research time. So they are definitely pouring themselves into the job. And I don't know how sustainable that is in the long run. But I agree that what Jennifer said is that hopefully what lecturers are gaining from this is a greater appreciation of what their added value to teaching is. So it's not to rush in and answer every forum question about, you know, where's the homework this week, but it's actually to lend their expertise on a particular topic and to give students feedback on their performance. That's my opinion in terms of what their added value is. So they may become forced to be more strict with what they spend their time on, but that might actually be a really good thing. And even though the investment in a good online course is higher in the beginning, it pays dividends as you go on, because then you can often reuse a lot of the material if it's created thoughtfully from the beginning.
I would add that we can observe that the roles of the teachers will be more diverse. So we need different roles, and we try to cope with one role in all this, what is needed, and that won't work. So I think content producing is one. Another one is who feels responsible for the whole learning arrangement. Who is the tutor in that section? Who is the e-tutor? So we have a whole team for a good learning process. And if we think about differentiated roles, then it's getting not so much burden on the single person. But of course, then this team has to be orchestrated. But I think then the professor should really focus what is needed from him or her. And there are other roles that can be supportive. And this most valuable time can be spent on those issues that only the professor can do. So maybe that helps. At the moment, it's too much on one person, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Well, I think I'm looking at the clock now, so I think I'm going to draw it together and say An enormous thank you to our three presenters today. It's tough. Life is so busy, and to make time for us to come and join us for an hour and a half from, locally from ETH, Karin, thank you so much. And from Penn State, Jennifer, I've looked on the map to see where you come from, and it's fascinating geology, by the way. Really great to have you with us and lovely to hear. And again, we're going to look forward to having your resources and all the rest of it. Ada, thank you so much again. Nordrhein-Westfalen from western part of Germany. Thank you so much for being here and sharing with us what it's like to run a remote university. I'm really thrilled. And I just suck out some things from the messages which Gert Kortemeyer is kindly going to summarize for us. That your 12 ideas, the Hagen Manifesto, which we will all be studying in detail about ideas and demands on the new learning. That was really fascinating. Jennifer's change in the learning spaces, the transformation to blended learning, and how you have to create from different perspectives, thinking from the faculty perspective and from the student perspective. And then Karin's comments about rethink time, rethink space. And I love the bit at the end, remember that we're all parts of the, I always say it in this way, the human race. I do lots of racing, but I always try and remember I'm part of the human race. And I think it drives the fact that Heraclitus is alive and kicking today. The world is changing. And if you want to stay the same, you're going to get left behind, as the barking dogs get left behind as the train moves out of the station, to use one. In our culture, we'd say that. In India, they'd say as the elephant moves on. So culture is important in that. So I'd like to say thank you to all the participants. We've still got 32 of you with us at the moment. Thank you so much for hanging in there to the end and asking really, really good questions. And any feedback, please send to the Secretary General of EWORA, Julia. We'll very happily take that on board and distribute that, as I said, together. Julia Kaglayan, you know her. And we will send you the report and the presentations and all of the links. Thanks to Gert for doing that. Thanks also to On Stage for doing that. And just as a sign off from EWORA, there will be a third seminar led by Professor Kerstin Tam, who is the Rector of Malmö. The date is just moving a little bit at the moment, so watch this space. It will be on our website, www.ewora.org. And also you will see on there, there'll be the 7th EWORA conference taking place between the 9th and 11th of June. Basically, it should be in Zurich. However, we will also be running it in a hybrid sense, just in case people don't want to travel, and so that we can share some of the great speakers that we will have there on this occasion. So please do come and join us. It's going to be a really fun time, and we've had lots of lovely thank yous in the answers in the chat, so that's fine. No last questions. And on that final note, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and good luck with recreating the future of blended learning and whatever it is in life after Corona. Thank you from all of us, and goodbye. Thank you so much. And hopefully we'll stay on screen a little bit, the 6 of us, and we'll have a little chat afterwards.